I think Ajay has joined.
Yes.
Hello, Ajay. That is Dr. Ajay Pradhan. He is President CEI.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good to see you all.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hey, Ajay.
How are you?
Good afternoon, Ajay.
I saw people from different latitude and longitudes of our So I have to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining, our friends, colleagues from different parts of the world. I can see, Anna is from early morning.
I'm going live streaming. I'm going.
Yeah, okay.
I'm putting you in spotlight at the moment.
Good afternoon to all the participants present at this webinar by the Consulting Engineers Association of India. We will have the opening remarks by President of CEAI. I will give you a brief profile on Dr. Ajay Pradhan. He is currently the President of CEAI, and he has 3 decades of experience in planning, designing, and implementing several infrastructure projects. He is currently President and CEO of C2S2 Consulting Engineers and formerly MD of CH2M Hill and Halco India. He has been consultant to the Planning Commission, founder, director, and managing director for DHI India, among other prestigious appointments. After his graduation in civil engineering, he has done his master's and doctorate in water resources engineering. Dr. Ajay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sainaji, for giving this brief introduction of mine. Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome everyone participating in this webinar on ethical conduct in engineering consultancy practice. At the outset, let me thank all my colleagues, and especially Madam Sayana Philip, Chair, and Mr. Umesh Srivastava, Co-Chair of the Ethics Committee of Consulting Engineer Association of India, for organizing this very timely and important webinar. Madam Sayana Philip is going to be the moderator of this webinar, and she has over 30 years of experience in water and environmental field of consulting engineering, and headed over 10 years as ethics counselor. She's BTech in civil engineering from IIT Madras and Masters in environmental engineering from Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. I heartily welcome all eminent speakers, panelists who will be sharing their knowledge, experience, and thoughts in ethics and integrity in engineering consultancy practice around the globe. The Consulting Engineering Association of India, which is called CAI, founded in 1960, is the apex body of consulting engineers in India. It represents the Indian engineering consultancy professionals at the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, which is called FIDIC. And CAI has over 500 members in India. Engineering is a profession that directly impacts all members of our society. Engineers design highways, bridges, buildings, machines, equipment, manufacturing facilities, chemical processing plants, refineries, etc. Engineers therefore have touched the products what we use on our daily needs, and is a vital impact on our quality of life. To uphold and advance the integrity of the engineering profession, a code of engineering ethics has been adopted by most of engineering professional societies around the world. The general principle of the code of ethics for various engineering societies are quite similar. The fundamental rules for engineering ethics in accordance with the professional engineers in the United States are that they have to fulfill their professional duties. They shall hold paramount to the safety, health, and welfare of the public, perform services only in the areas of their competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act for each employer or client as faithful agents of or trustees, avoid deceptive acts, conduct themselves honorably, reasonably, ethically, and lawfully, so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. For consulting engineers, engineering ethics is a thoroughly researched and published subject. The code of ethics, therefore, is and should be a driving force in how engineers approach their work. In the United States, engineers practicing independently as a consulting engineers are required to be professionally licensed. In contrast, in India, engineers working in industry, education, and often government need not be professionally licensed. As mentioned above, professional engineering societies have adopted relatively uniform codes of ethics. However, technical societies have often not adopted these codes. Therefore, there is a dichotomy in industry as to who is to be held responsible in the highest regard, the public or the employer. A specific group of consulting engineers that works as a contractors for industry to help develop and design new processes and manufacturing facilities appears to lie somewhere between independent consulting engineers and industry engineers. I will call them as a group of consulting engineers as industrial consultants. And this group in the engineering community that is challenged to uphold the code of ethics established for the profession, while also providing cost-effective solutions for their clients. We often get into real-life problems while delivering our services, especially as a consulting engineer, independent engineer, bid preparation or support engineer, design for design build contractors, owners engineer, third-party engineer, review engineer, etc. I'm confident that the presentation and deliberation will address various ethical aspects of consulting engineers to conduct their profession around the globe. Thank you all. Back to Madam Saina.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay. I will now give you a brief introduction of the theme of today's webinar. Good afternoon again, and good morning to our overseas speakers. It is my privilege to introduce the theme of today's webinar, Ethical Conduct in Engineering Consultancy Practice. The importance of an ethical code for the consulting engineering industry and a professional body like the Consulting Engineers Association of India, that is CEAI, cannot be overstated. The CEAI has had a code of ethics for several years. As a part of the CEAI's strategic plan, the code was reviewed in 2018, but largely remained unchanged. Hence, the version as it exists today was put in place in 2013. Based on inputs from stakeholders, CEAI also has a process, a standard procedure for handling complaints on violation of code of ethics, which was issued for use in 2019. The code of ethics serves as a framework and guide for companies and professionals who are our members. Its support of day-to-day functioning and when rendering services to their customers. It also serves to clarify an organization's mission and provides a common set of values or principles to adhere to. It is CEAI's endeavor to enhance the credibility of the engineering industry and preserve the reputation and integrity of the consulting profession. The purpose of today's webinar is to create an awareness about the need for ethics and promote sound ethical business practices amongst the consulting fraternity in India. It is not enough for companies to simply have a code of ethics, no matter how well drafted the code is, if it is relegated to its website or its sets of manuals. The need is for its vigorous implementation. CEOs and senior management of companies need to lead by example. Ethics in the workplace is the moral code that guides the behavior of employees with respect to honesty, integrity, discipline, fairness, mutual respect, adherence to quality, contractual commitments, a sense of right and wrong with regard to the professional conduct and decision-making. It doesn't only apply to individual employees. The organization itself should exemplify standards of ethical conduct. The responsibility is greater in case of large organizations or companies, which should serve as role models for younger and smaller organizations to emulate. In a competitive business environment, the challenges are several when trying to achieve commercial success, yet conform to high moral and ethical standards. And I'm sure all Indian companies have experienced it. We hope today's webinar and its deliberations will provide a perspective that will be of immense value to our participants. I would now like to start the rest of the program by inviting Mr. Richard Stump, who's the chair of the Integrity Management Committee of FIDIC, to give a keynote address. A brief on Mr. Stump. He is Vice President of RS&H, a global architectural engineering and construction management company. He is based in Chicago and serves in the aerospace and defense practice. His involvement with the FIDIC IMC began in 2008. Mr. Stump's work experience spans 25 years, including business development, large project and program management, and managing new and existing markets in the US and globally. His professional activities have been across 39 different countries, including in India. I would like to invite Mr. Richard Stump to please start his address. Thank you.
Fantastic. Madam Sayona, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this important event today. And certainly I'd like to extend my thanks to CEAI, to Dr. Ajay, and to Mr. Maini as well for the opportunity to speak and to share a few words with everyone on the topic of integrity and collective action. So let me get my my slides queued up. Fantastic, we are ready to go. So what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is just have a short journey with all of us and talk about the notion of integrity and its role within ethics and the importance of collective action. So what I'm going to do is start with baseline in integrity. I mean, it may mean many things to many people, but for the purposes of this short talk, I'll set a point in the ground for us to start with. Then I'm going to share a small story with you about an ethical challenge that I faced early in my career. And we're going to take a quick look at the code that CEAI uses that Madame Sayona mentioned. And I want to look at that from the lens of collective action and how it can grow and how it can be more than just an individual code. We'll talk about the importance of ethics from the individual to the collective. I'm going to share an example of a model that we might consider for collective action and integrity. And then we'll get close to finishing up with an opportunity where we can reinforce the opportunities and the challenges that younger members of our profession face when they're faced with ethical dilemmas and ethical decisions. And then I'll leave you with a short challenge and we'll move on into the rest of the presentation. So let's talk first about integrity. There are a couple of different definitions that I've put up here on the screen. Two are straight out of dictionaries. And then the third one is really what the charge that FIDIC has given to the Integrity Management Committee. You can see a theme throughout all of them that it's important that you have a strong sense of ethics, a moral code, and then in the sense of the Integrity Management Committee, our job is to raise awareness and to fight corruption and to really lead that charge on behalf of the global engineering community. So having talked about a little bit about the importance of integrity, I want to share a story with all of you. Some of you may recognize this city, some of you may not. It's a place that I know well. It's the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. And it was the site of the first really serious ethical challenge that I faced in my career. I was in Yemen acting as project director on a World Bank funded project. I had a team of multinational specialists working with me, including professionals from India. And I found myself sitting in the office of my client one day, and I was asked for a bribe. At that point in time, I had to make a very important decision. I didn't have a lot of time to make that decision, and I had to rely upon the training and really my own moral ethical code that had brought me to that point where I now faced a very, very important ethical crisis. At the same time, this is a decision that I had to make alone, and I did not have the opportunity to really take advantage of a collective group of individuals to support me, to help me be ready to make that decision. And unfortunately, many of us find ourselves having to face ethical decisions in our consulting careers, some large, some small, but all important. So that has always stuck with me, this fact that I had to really face the challenge of being asked to do something that was very, very unethical. So what could be done to support someone like myself when I found myself in this position at the age of 34, being asked for a bribe? What could we consider that might allow others, before they get to that point, to take advantage of collective knowledge, of the collective integrity of a system, to help prepare them to make the right decision when faced with that type of a challenge? One of the things that I took a look at prior to this webinar was I looked at the Code of Ethics, and Madame Sayona walked us through the importance of the code and how it's being used and how it's been developed by CEAI. There's a lot of great information in here, and certainly engineers and professionals are asked to sign up to agree to follow that code. And it defines how they act and how they will not act. And one of the things I was interested in is, where's the opportunity for some collective action? What are the collective responsibilities, not just of the individual professional, to support the happiness, the welfare, the safety, and the health of the state, but what are your collective responsibilities to each other, and what are the others' responsibilities to you? In looking at the code, the one area where I found this was in the last point, which is based upon the responsibility to one's employees in really providing opportunities for their professional development. I'd like to offer a slightly different take on what that code might be, in terms of what is the value that the individual brings to the collective strength and the collective ethics of the engineering community here in India, or just even the global community that we're all part of. So with that in mind, please continue thinking about what that collective ethics might look like, as we're going to take a quick pivot to something different. And I want to leave India for a minute and to put this idea of collective action on hold for a second, and pivot to a model. And we're going to look at nature for that source of that model, as to what collective integrity might look like and a cooperative system might look like. So we'll leave India behind, and we're going to move to Canada. So in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at forests in Canada and the specific work of a professional there who lives and works in British Columbia. Some of you may know who this woman is that you'll see standing next to this great tree in the forest of British Columbia. Her name is Suzanne Simard. She's a forest ecologist and a professor at the University of British Columbia, who has dedicated her entire life to understanding the workings of trees and understanding the way that the forest works. Having grown up in a family of multi-generations of loggers and individuals who lived and worked in the forest, she brought some unique qualifications to the table when she began her research, and it's actually quite groundbreaking. And I can sum it up really in 5 words in terms of one of the significant takeaways of her research. And those 5 words are: trees talk to each other. Through her research, Suzanne has identified, and her teams have identified, the fact that trees share information. They talk to each other through a network of mycelium fungi that are in the forest floor. And these mycorrhizal networks actually allow the trees to share nutrients, to share things like carbon and phosphorus with each other, but they're actually able to, and she's proven this through research, that this communication occurs, and it occurs in 2 directions. The forest is organized according to trees that seem to be older. She's called them either hub trees or mother trees, and they have the ability to share information about what's happening in the woods and how the organism, how the system actually talks to itself. She's also been able to demonstrate that trees don't compete with each other, but rather they cooperate. They share knowledge of danger. They share knowledge of how to grow up and be a responsible contributor to the forest environment. And then even at the end of their lives, the mother trees share that information through the network and help the next generation of trees to grow into their roles within that forest ecosystem. And what's one really interesting point is that different species of trees actually do communicate with each other through this mycorrhizal network. Fir trees and birch trees have been proven through the use of radioactive isotopes and Geiger counters that they do share that information. And Dr. Simard has been able to show through 40 years of research how rich and diverse in the strength and integrity of the forest that exists in British Columbia, and certainly that exists in forests all over the world. So the demonstration of a collective integrity is absolutely clear and present. For those of you who might be saying, well, what might this look like? How can you demonstrate the connectivity of the woods? I just share a small example here. This is a diagram that was taken from some of the research that her teams have done. The darker circles represent those hub trees. You can see they are very connected in terms of the way that they share information through these fungal and root networks. The lighter trees are different species of trees. And then finally, you'll see a couple of smaller yellow dots that represent really kind of the freshers of the forest, those younger junior saplings that are growing up, finding their way in the role of the forest and learning from those mother trees. One of the things that Suzanne Simard has really kind of challenged people is to understand the importance of these trees.
Hello?
And which one she has said is that get out into the forest, which is, get out into society. Support and defend the senior trees as these mother trees in the forest, for they have information to share. They are really the organizers of the collective integrity and knowledge of the forest. And we need to make sure that they're maintained so that that information can be passed along to future generations. And then finally, the diversity of the forest is incredibly critical, because if you have a forest where it's been husbanded to the sense that all the trees are the same, we're growing them up to basically commoditizing the trees rather than allowing them to build upon their rich diversity of type, of species, of age, the forest loses the integrity that's built over time. And that knowledge that is encased within those mother trees just is not shared amongst the entire community. So with those thoughts in mind, looking at this model of collective integrity and how trees organize themselves, I want to look at what this could mean for the consulting community. And there's an important point that I'd like to demonstrate where effort should be placed to make sure that we are able to bring up the next generation of consultants, the next generation of professionals in a way that allows them to be knowledgeable, to understand their role, as well as to be prepared for when they might meet a challenging situation. And in that sense, it's like the challenge that I met when I was working in Yemen. So this is something that, again, there's a need to reinforce not just a code of ethics, but one's internal ethics. And I'd like to make the argument that this should be done collectively in order to allow junior members of the profession to be ready for the day when they have to face a very important ethical decision. What might that look like? So I'm going to demonstrate the importance of that particular ethical decision point through a model which is known as the pyramid of choice. The pyramid of choice is a model, again, that was developed by two sociologists in the United States, Carolyn Tavares and Elliot Aronson. And what they did in their research is they were looking at a wide variety of things in terms of how people make decisions and what happens once they've made those decisions and they reinforce them through convincing themselves that it was the right thing to do. So the example that in their research that really comes to the fore is the example of whether one decides to cheat. And they did a series of studies on it. So picture, for example, remember back to a point in your career when you were taking a very important exam. And let's say that this exam was going to have the outcome of whether or not you would be able to get into IIT or get into one of the best engineering schools that was at the top of your list. Now you're walking into that room to take that exam. You're not as prepared for it as you'd like to be, but you see that one of the teaching assistants has left the examination key on a table right outside the door. And you look around and no one will see you if you decide to take it. So what do you do? And that was the focus of their experiment. That was the focus of the study. Would people decide to cheat? That's an ethical decision. And what they found is that over time, the individuals who decided to cheat would justify their behavior. They would say, well, it wasn't so bad. You know, I really needed to get into that good school. Or then later they might say, you know, everybody cheats, everybody does it. They continue to convince themselves that what they've done was really an acceptable decision. And they'll move farther and farther away from a point of ethics and a point of integrity. And then perhaps several years later, they'll find themselves looking at a conviction for bribery and facing prison time because they've done something so far outside of the realm of acceptability in terms of ethics, because they were able to continuously justify the decisions that they were making that were not correct. Now, conversely, if that young student makes the decision to not cheat and says, I'm not going to do this, they will convince themselves that that was an appropriate decision. And then they'll continue to reinforce good decision making. You know, cheating is wrong. I shouldn't be doing that. I'm going to get ahead. I'm going to get ahead on my own merit, not by taking advantage of things in the system that were not appropriate. So supporting younger members of our profession at that ethical decision point and looking at the pyramid of choice and understanding what the consequences are is very, very important. If we think about how that plays out across not just one individual's decision, but all of the young members of our profession, and all of them make an incorrect decision, think about what the consequences of that are to say, just in India, if all of our young consultants make bad decisions at an important ethical point. We have a system that's not sustainable, a system that is poor integrity, it's not resilient, and at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to provide quality services to our customers. So I would argue that it is incredibly critical to the integrity of the entire consulting ecosystem that we look to those decision points and reinforce good decision-making amongst our younger members. So now I'd like to leave everybody with a challenge. What could a cooperative collective system look like here in India? Looking at our consultancy, looking at the role of CEI, I would ask, get out amongst your networks. Find ways to make sure that you're maintaining connections, even in a nation of that's still subject to the pandemic and still working its way out of it. Identify and reinforce the ethical champions in the Indian consultancy sphere. Use them to organize the system and use them to help guide and provide ethical guidance to our younger members. Additionally, the diversity of the system is important. We should have people of different ages, different experiences, different backgrounds and ethnicities, who are all contributing to the collective integrity of consultancy services in India. And look at the code. What could that code look like in terms of incorporating cooperative behaviors? And then finally, as I mentioned, with regard to the pyramid of choice, the reinforcement of ethical decision-making amongst our members as they're growing into their roles before they get to the point.
Mr. Stump, that was a very thought-provoking and interesting presentation and very important inputs on collective integrity and the wonderful example of the forest ecosystem, and are responsible to the next younger generation. And also we have taken those suggestions that you have made to encourage cooperative behavior. And so now we will go on. Thank you very much. We will go on to the next part of the webinar. That's the panel discussion. We would have 4 panelists from the industry who will hold the floor for 5 minutes each, followed by an interesting interaction. Our first panel speaker is Dr. Abhijit Dasgupta. He needs little introduction. He is former Joint Managing Director of Dastoor Company. His topic is consulting engineers as trustee for employer and society. A brief on Dr. Abhijit Dasgupta. He has had 49 years of experience in providing consulting engineering services for projects in the field of steel, power, other heavy industrial projects in India and abroad. Professional awards received include a Lifetime Achievement Award from CEAI and Eminent Engineer Award from the Institution of Engineers, India. He has done his Bachelor of Civil Engineering from Jadavpur University, his Master's from IIT Kanpur, and Doctorate from Jadavpur University in Kolkata. Dr. Dasgupta, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Madam Sarna. I think the webinar on the ethical conduct in engineering consultancy practice is a very challenging in today's parlor, because the ethical conduct in the consulting engineering, I will talk about the consulting engineers as a trustee for employer and the society. We will all agree that consulting engineers are like medical doctors who successfully practice with high esteem based on mutual trust. And building trust is a part of what is required to maintain good ethics, and ethical behavior of consulting engineers is a prerequisite for building trust. Trust in business is the cornerstone of relationship between the consulting engineers and their employer, along with the suppliers, vendors, contractors, and other stakeholders. Ethical behavior, as we are talking about, includes enhancing integrity, dignity, and honor of engineering profession. Now, how to practice that? That's the great challenge for all of us. Consulting engineers shall build, to my level, the professional reputation of the merit of business. They shall advise the employer in selecting the right site for the project. It is starting from the right site of the project, where there are a lot of vested interest for choosing the other side. So one has to be very clear in his honesty to choose the right site for the project, for helping the client. They shall guide their employer in selecting the state-of-the-art process route with an optimum layout, keeping provision of expansibility, along with the right choice of suppliers, vendors, contractors, prioritizing efficient time management of the project. Because we will find that there will be a lot of interest even in the client side to choose the contractors or suppliers, even on the process routes. So one has to be very firm in that, should not compromise with those things. They should give their, consultant should give their opinion on the same. And one has to understand that who is the client. Somebody's counterpart is not really the client. We have to see the client's interest has been satisfied. And they should advise their employer on the financial aspects of the project and balancing the capex and opex, resulting in most economical solution. Today, the expenditure may be more, but the opex operational expenditure will be less. One has to make them understand, the client, that why they should spend a little bit more at the point, because in long term it benefits them. That has to be clearly understood. That is the kind of honesty one has to say. And most importantly, any consulting engineering organization should build trust in its own workplace. And that is a very, very key point, that unless the consulting engineers organizations, they cannot build the trust in the workplace, they should provide opportunities for continuous professional development of engineers and other technical personnel under the employment with the state-of-the-art knowledge. The knowledge, the client's knowledge is increasing, contractors' knowledge are increasing. So the consultant should have the most important knowledge of all their stakeholders, of their employees, so that they can really control the whole situation. And we want us to spend some thing for developing the knowledge, it has to do that, because the state of the art process road the consultant should dictate. Ethical behavior of consulting engineers shall include the trustworthiness to the society as well, because they cannot just leave the society alone. They shall respond to the call, say yes to less, by optimizing the use of 5 natural resources in the earth, which is called Shiti, Apa, Teja, Morut, Bom. Those are the 5 natural resources, and they should try to optimize that for the interest of the society, for the well-being of the earth. And they should optimize the requirement of land. They should optimize the requirement of water. They should try to strive for the optimal use of energy, optimal use of oxygen, and minimization of carbon emission. And finally, the implementation of holistic approach of eco-balance, including reduction in requirement of restore, waste management, and use of recyclable products. These are all achievable by
Dr.
the application of
Dasgupta, your
improved
time.
process and plant operating system, including the application of IoT, using renewable energy, along with energy-saving equipment, introducing zero discharge concept, etc. Consulting engineers as trustee for their employer and the society shall comply with safety, health, and welfare for the construction personnel and public, and strive to comply with the principles of sustainable development. They should comply with strict adherence to environmental rules and regulations, and they should include in the conditions of the and issue public statements only in objective and truthful manner. However, it must be understood that
Dr. Dasgupta, I think your time is over.
Time to achieve excellence in different business environment. They should change is a key word of the success, and they shall strive to change like a tree, which changes in all seasons without compromising with its roots, which is synonymous with values and ethics. Thank you, Ms. Anna. You can take back the one. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta, for a very candid acknowledgement that trust is key, and it's important to give correct technical and financial guidance to the customers, including vendors and suppliers. Our next panelist is Ms. Kalpana Jay Shankar. She is former Ethics Counselor of Tata Consulting Engineers. Her topic is establishing the ethical framework systems, processes, and communication. A brief on Ms. Jay Shankar. She is former CHRO and Vice President, Tata Consulting Engineers, and Senior VP in Mastic. As Ethics Counselor, she was responsible for implementation of the Tata Business Code of Ethics across the company. In engineering, consulting, and IT organizations, she has undertaken change management programs, organization-wide, working in close conjunction with business. She did a bachelor's in mathematics from WCC Madras and master's in management from IRMA Anand. Ms. Jay Shankar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sayana. I'll just take a minute to share my screen. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be talking to you on the subject of establishing the ethical framework systems, processes, and communication around the same. While we talk about the code of ethics for engineers, which is the major focus in this forum, I think it's extremely important to create a culture in the organization which supports ethics, and that is what I'm going to talk about. So basically, why is it so important to have a documented code of conduct? And a lot of us have covered that. I would say primarily and most importantly, it provides a common set of rules or standards for the business to adhere to and for the employees to follow too. If we look at underlying principles for having a business code of ethics, while all of them are extremely important, I would like to draw your attention to two which sometimes get overlooked. One is the importance, the principle of good corporate citizenship, which forms a basis. The second is the economic development of communities the business operates in. While there are a lot of other important points mentioned over here, these are also 2 points which need to be kept in mind. While we talk about the business code of ethics, there are several supporting policies which the organization needs to also put in place, and which mature organizations do have in place, like the whistleblower policy, the safety, health and environment policy, the anti-bribery, anti-corruption policy, and so on. And each one has a very specific role to play, and it really complements the business code which is there. While we have the documents in place, the policies in place, it has to be a living document. It can't be something which is just there on the internet, something which is there in the file, and therefore, as even Sayona talked about it when she did the introduction to this topic, how we implement it becomes extremely important, starting with the sponsorship which comes from the leadership and from management. It is because everyone is observing the leader in the organization. The leaders are role models for the rest of the people in the organization. And therefore, in organizations like the Tata Group, like Tata Consulting Engineers, where I have worked, most of our communication when we address our employees start with talking about the code, start with talking about following all the different parts of the code and holding ourselves to high moral and ethical standards. Not only that, the board provides an important oversight on what's happening as far as ethics is concerned. Now, again, it becomes important that there is a structure in place, and therefore we have the principal ethics officer, who would be the head of the organization, the chief ethics counselor, which is the role I played, and then we have several location ethics counselors, so that they are the people who are absolutely close to the employees. They counsel them, they guide them, they tell them what is right, what is wrong. If the collective versus the individual, which was referred to, people who've been in the organization, who understand how things work, who understand what are the sort of dilemmas the person may face while carrying out the job as an engineer, whether at site, whether while approving designs, etc. So we need to have such champions within the organization. And of course, regular reporting and case studies through which people can learn about the business ethics, about the code. Also, it is very important to have a very robust mechanism to address grievances of not following the code, of making sure if there is any act of misdemeanor, you can talk about it without fearing any retribution of any kind. So all these also need to be documented and put in place. An employee needs to be assured that confidentiality will be maintained. Again, in the organization where I worked in, we had very well-defined processes. We had SLAs. So when there were complaints made, there were timelines which we had to follow. Then there were outcomes depending on what the investigation revealed. We reported this to the management, we reported this to the board, and this is a system which needs to be put into organizations which are relatively new. Further, there's also a good practice of establishing rewards to recognize people who have behaved in a very moral way, who have had the courage to raise a complaint, because it's not easy to complain when you see someone is not doing the correct thing. And also we make it very clear that we need to communicate the code to everybody, to all our stakeholders, to our customers, to our employees, to our vendors, and they also know how they need to raise any complaint that they may want to make. I would like to close by talking about communication and training around this, which cannot be undermined in any way. So on an annual basis, people are expected to understand the code. We have e-learning programs which teach people. There are scenarios which are built where people are asked to choose what is right, what is wrong. There are tests which are taken at the end of the program. It's also an integral part of the onboarding process. Good organizations try and see that they have the code available in local language so that different people who are interacting, yes, I'll just take a minute and close sign up. They understand the code and they are able to implement and apply it in its full spirit. I would just like to end by saying that even when it comes to ethics, it's really a journey, just like you take a journey when it comes to quality or people practices and so on and so forth. It is a journey, but it is a journey really worth taking, because finally then we can have a sound sleep because we know we have done the right thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jay Shankar. It was a very interesting presentation. You've mentioned the policies that are put in place in large organizations and the processes thereof. I think that is very important, the kind of systems and procedure which are in place so that you're able to implement a proper ethical code of conduct. That's very important. And the means you have for disseminating them and the training provided, it's a very good example. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Mr. Alok Bomik. He is MD and Managing Director of BNS Engineering Consultancy. His topic for today's webinar is Ethics and Integrity, Important Traits in Consultancy. Please keep to 5 minutes, Mr. Bomik.
Yeah. Am I audible? Hello, yeah. Am I audible?
Just a minute. I'll just tell a few words about you. Mr. Bomik has more than 40 years of design consultancy experience in transportation infrastructure. He is an accredited international professional engineer from Institute of Engineers, India. He has received several awards and citations in his professional career. He is a recipient of the 24th S.B. Joshi Memorial Award for Excellence in Bridge and Structural Engineering. He has a postgraduate degree in structural engineering from IIT and is a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering. Mr. Bomik, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ms. Sayana. Can I have my slides, please? Hello, Mr. Mani, can I have my slides, please? Or shall I share? Hello. I think my slides needs to be shared, or I should be given permission to share my slides. Hello.
Mr. Bomik, are you able to share?
No, I think the sharing right can be given so that I can share.
Yeah, I've told him to. I'll just.
Yeah, I think now I have got the sharing right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
This is my first slide. Is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all speakers, panelists, and participants. I'm going to speak briefly about the ethics and integrity, the two very important traits in consulting. As consulting engineers, our actions can affect the quality of life for millions and millions of people. And it is therefore vital that we as a consultant work in an ethical manner so that we can earn the confidence of the society. So my presentation will be very brief, focusing on these four pillars of ethical integrity in consulting. To begin with, let me talk about the bribery and corruption, which is, what you see in this slide is the graphic representing the perceived level of corruption in some 180 countries, which is done by Transparency International in 2020. It is done every year. So this is the latest one. And as we can see, India is at 86th place out of 180 countries they have surveyed. It means that we have a lot to do to fight corruption. And as we all know, corruption is one of the main hindrance to sustainable development and respect for human rights. And it is one of the major ethical violations that is plaguing us all. In some countries and in some organizations, the ethical culture is strong and bribery has zero tolerance. This is the news item which came only day before yesterday in India. Very heartening to note that there are few organizations who take bribery very, very seriously. The ethical atmosphere that is created in the workplace by organizational leadership has a strong influence to the employees, and such organizations really do a lot of good things to the employees and their ethical culture. However, having said that, bribery is, another form of doing business in many countries of the world, and fight against corruption, if we have to do, it needs to be more aggressive and focused. It is very clear that we, as a leading professional association, that is CEAI, representing the consulting fraternity in India, we are not doing enough in combating corruption. And this means that this kind of conversation that we are having in this webinar has to be made stronger, has to be more frequent, and we need to continue to talk about it until we fight, until our fight against corruption comes to a logical conclusion. Unfortunately, corruption has social acceptance, and there is need to change this public mindset. Our value system needs to be relooked at in today's world. Wealth acquired through unethical practices are celebrated rather than being castigized. Consequence of corruption seems to be far less than the benefit of corruption. So we need to reverse that equation. In other words, we have to make the corruption extremely painful, and that somehow is a great challenge. It is easier said than done. We come to the next second issue of concern, which is the procurement integrity. And lack of procurement integrity is a serious issue in consulting particularly. Many of the consulting firms, they do not have the procurement policy, and they violate these ethical principles even without having a knowledge about it. I think eminent speakers previous to me spoke about the ethic and compliance manager. All these things are there in big organizations, but there are many organizations who do not even have a ethical or compliant manager in their system. Next issue is of ethical dilemma of conflict of interest. Conflicts of interest is not always intentional corruption, but sometimes it is an unintentional bias. Bias is widespread, and the problem is even well-meaning, is applicable to even well-meaning professionals. There are many examples of conflict of interest at work. I would not like to, time will not permit me to go through in details, but consulting organizations must have a firm policy on the conflict of interest. Generally, it is done in two steps. First is the step of disclosure, and the second is for the management to review the disclosure and to determine what action needs to be taken. But this is very important. And last point which I want to highlight is about the project ethics in consulting. I think our president in the initial opening remarks mentioned about the general code of ethics, project ethics that we need to follow as an organization or as an association. And look at the terms which is mentioned over here. If you look at the last one, conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully. Particularly look at these last canons, and if you, all these, whatever is mentioned, in reality are violated more often than not. Let's face it. A lot needs to be done to bring project ethics into practice. And I think our keynote speaker and the subsequent speakers have touched upon this issue very clearly.
Mr.
So
Bowman.
my closing remark is that the important
We are unable to hear you. Mr. Bomik, we are unable to hear you. Mr. Bomik. Mr. Bomik, we are unable to hear you. So thank you very much, Mr. Bomik. As usual, very blunt and forthright. You have made very, very valid points. Yes, the ethical challenges are multifold, but they need to be addressed by every organization in a manner that suits them best. You made a very valid point about how CEI can contribute in this, and that point is well taken. Thank you very much. Our final panel speaker is Lieutenant Colonel Alan Burby. He is advisor, business ethics and compliance. A brief about Colonel Alan Burby. Colonel Burby promotes the embedding of strong ethics and compliance processes and practices as a competitive business differentiator. Are you able to hear me? Mr. Goshal, are you able to hear me?
Yes, Sayanaji, we can hear you.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. He's currently involved in a deeper engagement to grow interdependence between the education industry and the MSME sector. He has designed and delivered programs across a range of industry sectors, namely infrastructure, energy, IT and IT-enabled services, aerospace, financial services, etc. He's a postgraduate in personnel management and industrial relations. Colonel Burby, the floor is all yours. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Sayona. Thank you very much. Big shout out in appreciation to CEAI, Dr. Pradhan, esteemed panelists and friends in the engineering community across the world. I think the good news is I'm the last panel speaker and there's no PPTs because the Wi-Fi doesn't work very well where I'm speaking to you from. Bad news is you've got to listen to me for the next 5 minutes at least. I'm going to talk to you today about the ethical nuances in a high-performance culture. It was Edward Hall, an American anthropologist and cross-cultural researcher, who stated that culture is man's medium. There is not one aspect of human life that is not touched and altered by culture. This means personality, how people express themselves, including shows of emotion, the way they think, how they move, how problems are solved, how cities are planned and laid out, how transportation systems function and are organized, as well as how economic and government systems are put together and function. However, he stated, culture is frequently the most obvious and taken for granted and therefore the least studied aspect that influences behavior in the deepest and most subtle ways. Today, I've chosen to spotlight the human-centric dimension in a high-performance culture. Within this dimension, I am consciously focusing upon the vector of motivation, chiefly on extrinsic motivation, because culture, I believe, is a qualitative outcome of human relations between a group of people, small or large. Where does this journey start? Ethics is a journey far more from within oneself, originating from a space of inner governance when one habitually listens to one's inner voice and examines one's conscience, as against compliance, which is largely externally imposed upon us. In a scenario which I shall describe shortly, let's examine whether there is scope for expanding the definition of extrinsic motivation by incorporating explicitly the interplay of humanistic values, some of which could possibly even spur intrinsic motivation. Scenarios in general help us discern where and when the rubber hits the road. The scenario. What is the right thing to do? Let's travel together to a large infrastructure project owned by company XYZ. A few hundred contract workmen and vendors are present at site working on constructing this 3 lakh square feet building in India. One day, it's raining hard at the project site. A laborer working under constructor MS project is poised on top of an operational ready-mix concrete truck, RMC vehicle. He is bent over, struggling to remove a mechanical snag in the machine. He accidentally slips and falls into the cement mixer and is crushed, lifeless in moments. Post-accident investigation by the safety auditor reveals that the safety harness at the mouth of the RMC vehicle wasn't in place. The finger of blame apparently falls squarely on the negligent contractor, and legally too, given the contractual terms of engagement with the company. Some questions. Who is responsible for the life of this laborer? Who is mostly accountable herein? Who could be held liable for this loss of life? And who should compensate for this loss of life in some manner to the next of kin of the deceased? Let's reflect. Beyond the legalistic side of the scenario, is there room for a humanistic side to this picture frame when viewed with an ethical lens? Analysis. For both company XYZ and contractor MS project, the matter appears defensible from the contractual sides of the picture. The contractor points the blame on the deceased laborer, stating he should not have attempted to remedy the machine snag in the absence of the safety harness. While company XYZ could easily apportion full blame, responsibility, and accountability to the contractor because of the indemnity clause in the contract between them. In your opinion, friends, what is or what should be the right thing to do? What company XYZ does is as follows. The company site in charge immediately swings into action, reports the matter to the local police, arranges for the last rites of the deceased, visits the laborer's spouse in the labor camp nearby. He is accompanied by a female colleague from the HR department and a supervisor from the contractor's team. They join hands in consoling the grieving next of kin and assure her full support in arranging for the last rites as well as securing her future. Lessons learned. Legal versus ethical, the differentiation. Secondly, not only is ethics at the foundation of a legal system, quite often it is far beyond the scope of the legal world. Ethics illuminates us in what we ought to do. To consciously and compassionately look beyond the deceased worker at his family's future. This scenario highlights how creating a psychological safe place for our workforce should be integrated into operational decision-making. We become what we tolerate. So said Tony Robbins, the author of Awakening the Sleeping Giant in You. What could this mean with regard to the cultures we are part of? When people are valued, they feel motivated to not only perform well, but also travel the extra mile and excel. On the other hand, a person who is devalued performs half as well or even less because he, she, or they feel demotivated. In this context, any leader should be cognizant of the positive values and potentially enabling behaviors alongside negative values and potentially limiting behaviors. In context of the humanistic side of high performance culture, I touched upon two key aspects today. A simple scenario spotlighting the interplay between negative, read potentially limiting values-based behaviors, and positive, read potentially enabling values-based behaviors. And secondly, role of devoted ethical leadership and the correlation between values-based behaviors and extrinsic motivation of a workforce. In conclusion, it was nonetheless J.R.D. Tata, the doyen of Tata Industries and the Tata conglomerate, who stated, to lead people, one must lead with affection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Burby. You have elucidated very well the interplay between positive and negative values and the importance of safety and how to differentiate between legal and ethical requirements. Thank you very much. We will now have the panel discussion with all the panelists and Mr. Stump and Ms. Pinto, if she's present. Mr. Stump, Colonel Burby, Ms. Jay Shankar, Mr.
Yes.
Bomik, Dr. Das Gupta, can I please, Ms. Herbert, would you like to be speaking now, Ms. Herbert? Yeah.
Yes, is this the part where I show my presentation?
It's fine. If you have come in early, we can have your address now.
Oh, no, I can do this later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. We will now have the special address. I'm sorry. We will now have the special address by Ms. Anna Pinto Eber. She is a Senior Operations Officer of Integrity Unit of the World Bank in Washington. She manages this unit's anti-corruption and prevention portfolio for 2 regions, the South and East Asia and the Pacific. Her work has covered important clients of the bank in these regions, including India, China, and countries of the South and Southeast Asia. Practices and sectors she has advised on anti-corruption measures include infrastructure, urban, water, social sectors, as well as thematic areas as public-private partnerships. She was stationed for 3 years in the World Bank's Delhi office and served as a coordinator for the action plan related to integrity areas. She has a management degree and holds a master's from the New School for Social Research. Ms. Eber, you may please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I'm clicking on sharing the screen. So I need to assume control of the screen.
CEI, please close the profile. Yes, thank you.
Are you able to see my screen?
Not as yet.
Yes, now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thanks so much. I won't take much time so that we can have a robust discussion. So basically, what I'm going to do is continue the discussion that we've all been having on ethics. Do you see my screen now, Sayona?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so basically, the World Bank finances development projects in numerous countries. And one of the things that we do is we finance a lot of consultancy contracts. Now, what we've observed is there are many downsides to unethical conduct when consultancy engineers practice unethical behavior. So the pictures that I'm showing you on the screen are not from World Bank projects, but they very well could have been if these were projects that we financed. So for example, on the left picture, you can see that the road has collapsed here as a result of low quality construction. And on the right, you can see here that the road has a lot of potholes and was clearly perhaps not constructed using the right specifications. So potentially what may have happened here is if this had been
we are seeing only the first slide. We are not seeing your slide which you're.
Okay. I apologize. I apologize. 1 second, please. I'll ask the. Thank you. I'll ask.
Can the secretariat please put the slides on?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. So while we wait, so basically, what we're trying to to accomplish here is to kind of discuss, right, alongside the ethical standards that are being promoted by your association. We recognize that they take place in real world settings. Now, one of the, as I was mentioning, there are downsides to unethical conduct that have real effects on the communities wherein engineers operate. So let me pause and check in first with Bayona, if you're able to show the presentation.
It hasn't come on as yet.
Okay.
Weber, you can go ahead with your.
Okay, thank you. So in the bank, though, what we try to do is engage with firms using an anti-corruption framework that is anchored on practices that we consider to be sanctionable. These include practices that are described as fraud. So fraudulent practices, meaning to say, if engineers, for example, use CVs that are false when bidding for a contract, or else fraud could also be experiences that are fake, right? So fraud is a practice that is considered sanctionable under the ethical anti-corruption framework of the bank. Another practice that that might be entered into is corruption, just straight up corruption. As one of the speakers described earlier, it's possible that engineers may be confronted with solicitations of bribes. So the context that that this is occurring in, as described by other speakers, is that as I'm showing you here on the screen, and as alluded to by one of the speakers earlier, in India, we recognize that the Corruption Perception Index is still pretty challenging. But more importantly, the Global Corruption Barometer, which is another means for Transparency International to measure how people feel about corruption. The Global Corruption Barometer indicates that in many situations, people encounter solicitations of bribes, and even in their everyday kind of day-to-day transactions, like going to a hospital or even in teaching. So as part of this, right, so as part of my job, what I did once was to, when I was speaking to, sorry, can you go to the previous slide? When I was speaking to a group of
Please go to the
contractors,
previous slide, Secretariat.
When I was speaking to a group of contractors, I asked for them to tell us, quite frankly, what were the most challenging aspects of their work. And the word cloud here shows you that a lot of the previous slide, please. A lot of the words that they used was they encountered corruption. The previous slide, please. They encountered corruption. They encountered a lack of transparency during the procurement process. The
next slide.
Yes, thank you. So they encountered challenges in terms of their everyday work when they were implementing projects. Next slide, please. And so what you can see here is that we recognize that as consulting engineers, you probably face a lot of challenges when you do work in the real world. But what we hope you're going to be guided by is that many organizations, including the World Bank, as well as other organizations, do have a framework under which we consider integrity to be important. And if integrity is not practiced, there are actual consequences for not practicing integrity. So I described earlier, fraud is something that we sanction, corruption, coercion is also something that we sanction. This means that if a group of firms get together and try to prevent other bidders from participating, that is considered sanctionable, as well as collusion, wherein a group of bidders can get together and agree on who is going to win contracts under a certain financing. Lastly, obstruction. So if by chance there is a suspicion that the firm has engaged in some unsanctioned practice and you actively obstruct the investigation, then that would be sanctioned as well. Next slide, please. So amongst the many challenges that you need to navigate, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Whenever consultant engineers work well and in harmony with the contractors, with the financier, the World Bank, let's say, or with the line ministry that's implementing the project, then you most likely will end up with a work or a project that will be successful in meeting the objectives of that work. So you can see here in the screen, for example, this is a piece of engineering that is amazing. I'm sure you agree. You can imagine as well the difficulties that the various firms involved in constructing the various roads that intersect and bridges, as well as the buildings. The fact that they were successful, most likely, may be due to the fact that the consulting engineers did a good job in terms of doing their work of either supervising the work or advising on the design and things like that. So I leave you with this picture so that you have in mind what are the upside effects when you practice good integrity in your work. What you'll be a part of is a really good piece of engineering that will serve the people and enhance their lives. I'll close here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pinto. That was a very interesting presentation. It just shows that ethical conduct can directly impact project outcomes. In short, it can be responsible for the success or failure of a project. It should indeed give this consulting fraternity a lot of food for thought. We would now like to go to the panel discussion. All the panelists are on board. Yes. So we could, I would like to start with just asking Mr. Stump a question. When, in terms of how does a FIDIC Integrity Management Committee contribute to the fight against corruption? And what are the kind of lessons that are there for a place like India or an association like CE?
There are a number of things that the IMC is responsible for as it relates to the fight against corruption. And I really appreciate the comments by many of my fellow panelists as they touch upon the issues that we're trying to promote across the global community. So for example, the notion of working with member associations to help reinforce their objectives in terms of creating good standards and good governance for consultants in their community. That's one way that we can support CEAI. For example, we also work with the international funding institutions like the World Bank in terms of making sure that we're understanding the systems that they're using to prevent the fight against corruption, and working to understand where there might be opportunities, not just only for negative reinforcement of the consultant's actions so that they don't get sanctioned, but also are there opportunities for positive reinforcement where we can encourage good actions by those consultants so that, again, it contributes to a solid and productive outcome. Another thing that we're involved with, and this is something that if you go out to the FIDIC website, you'll see that FIDIC has created something called FIDIC Academy. And there will be a series of training seminars and webinars available globally through this platform. and there are a number of integrity modules that are in the process of being developed. So look for those in the coming months, and that'll represent another opportunity for, say, members of CEAI or other consultants around the world to get some top rate training as it relates to integrity management, working against corruption, and just proper ethical conduct. So thank you for the opportunity to respond to that question, Ms. Siana.
And Dr. Dasgupta, would you like to tell your experience about how building a trust is very important, as far as ethical behavior is very important to build a trust, and how does it impact on your services to your customer? The other panelists are free to ask whatever questions they want.
You are muted. Dasgupta, you are muted. On the left-hand bottom corner. On the left-hand bottom corner.
Yeah. While he's getting that ready, Alok, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. So I would, I would like to. Am I audible? First of all,
yes, you're audible. You're audible.
Okay. So I would like to say that the ethics is a very complex issue. It is, because one is the value system that you individually have. Second is the ethical culture of the organization where you are working. It depends where you at what position you are in. If you are at a very junior level, probably you have very little control on setting the ethical culture in the organization. If you are at a very senior level, at a leadership level, then the picture is slightly different. My message to all the young engineers who are going to join the consultancy is that firstly, you have to build your own ethical value system, which has to be absolutely on top. I mean, you need to realize that if you need to stay in a consultancy, one of the key traits that you should have is the ethical culture of yourself. Once you have that, even if you are at a junior level, you can influence the organization. I would go by what I think the keynote speaker Mr. Stump has shown us the path. If in case you find that the organization you are working in do not maintain the ethical standards and you are not able to change that, I think you need to take hard decisions at that time. You need to bring the change in the organization if you are working in, if you want to see the change in the society. I mean, you have to take the ethics very, very seriously. That's my message to the young engineers.
Kalpana, would you like to respond to that? And how a proper ethical framework helps enable the entire ethical process?
Yes, Sayana, thanks for that opportunity to respond. Mr. Bhaumik just mentioned that the seniors have more of a say and the juniors have lesser of a say. When you have an ethical framework in place and when systems and processes are there for everyone to follow, a standard system and process, then it really does not matter which part of the organization, which rung of the organization you're in, that really sort of levels the playing field, so to say. And, there are channels through which you can raise your issue or talk about a misdemeanor like I covered earlier. And we have had instances, and it is also again up to the management and leadership to encourage such complaints coming in or, such issues being brought forward and, actually recognizing the person and making an example of that person.
Can I talk to now?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I can tell you that we had the advantage of this ethical behavior for creating a long-standing relationship. Specifically, I can give two examples. One is Tata Steel. we have worked with Tata Steel since 1999, starting from 1 million ton, expanded up to 9.8 million ton at the same place. The type of the process we have recommended, the type of layout we have recommended for these ethical things, type of contractors we have recommended, type of suppliers we have recommended. In fact, we have fought with Tata Steel also at many point of time. We didn't agree with their views in a lot of cases, but we didn't compromise. And ultimately, that has helped us to work with Tata Steel for last 40 years. We're still working. And from the Jamshedpur to Kalinganagar also. Jamshedpur to Kalinganagar, also Kalinganagar up to 8 million ton steel plant. Another important thing is that when we started working with the Libya Iron Steel Company at Libya, where in fact, that time it was a global competition among all the consultants of the world. And we were selected. And when we selected the site, there are 3-4 sites were there. So we gave the first preference to Misurata site, seeing all the advantages of the raw material intake, raw material, the finished product, and the water systems, and all those things. The sea was also close by. We have used the sea water. And there was another site, which was Sirte, the birthplace of Gaddafi. That was also there actually. But there was some subtle pressure from the client to choose that site, which we didn't agree to actually. And we have said, no, that is the site must be the Misurata and not that one. I mean, if you want to change it, you can change it. I mean, the matter went to Gaddafi, and ultimately the site at Misurata was selected. So that has helped them for creating some sort of a mutual trust amongst the client and the consultant, and that is why we are still continuing the same band and expansions are going on. So I suggest everybody to all the youngsters that trust is the most important thing, and trust can have the ethical conduct.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta. That's a very important point. That it is that you have to work on building the trust of your client, and it's amazing that your company has managed to work for such a long time with one client. There is a query for Ms. Anna. Integrity and ethical governance starts from the government and elected officials. Do you feel countries who hold high standards of integrity should come together to form an alliance to drive greater accountability and integrity in public governance of countries they have economic relationships with? Ms. Anna?
Yes, thanks. That's an excellent question. I would just like to pick up on the theme that Richard started earlier, which is the notion of collective action. Now, strictly speaking, there are many platforms now. That's the good news. There are many platforms wherein the overall role is to encourage ethical practices in a variety of professions, including in consulting engineering, right? So these are topics that are discussed even at the G20 and also at the UN. And certainly the bank is a part of one of the institutions in the financing space that we're in all the projects that we conduct. We talk about what the integrity standards are with respect to the project, right? So please let me assure you that there is a movement internationally about why it's important to for nations as well as for companies to practice good ethics. And so we are doing what we can to support this global movement. And we're not the only ones talking about this. Large companies are talking about this as well. But it takes everybody. It takes you, most especially. It takes you in the consulting field to demonstrate your adherence to these standards. Because as I tried to show you, your work is so critical to many things that a typical construction area will undertake. And I also want to support Kalpana's message here about there are channels these days for you to communicate your concerns. So if you see something, that's something I always say, if you see something, you should definitely feel that you should say something, right? If it smells like something bad is going on, you should immediately report this to upward to the right channels.
Absolutely.
And if it's a World Bank project, you can communicate it to the bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pradhan, you have a query?
Well, actually, my query is essentially related to, as you know, that India is one of the IT hub where global engineers getting out to do business in different cultural settings. How do, whether World Bank or Richard or someone, how they see when they work internationally, how much they adapt to the cross-cultural settings of different countries in delivering projects? And understanding the, for example, the way we communicate to our engineers in India is completely different. I go to the site and sometimes I shout at the project supervisor not having this, the dashboard is not up to date. This is a challenge. Now, how this Indian engineers need to be really prepared to address to the global engineering requirement in future. I think that could be, anyone can respond to that.
So let me start. That's a really good point, Ajay. So as you know, the bank has offices all over the world, and we definitely take the client's lead in terms of communication, especially. And so our local offices are the ones who are the point persons for us in terms of this. But you're right in saying that India should prepare its engineers to work outside of India so that they can do their work well. And I'm sure that there are programs within institutions as well as programs that FIDIC runs that will prepare engineers for doing this work. The bank is also one of those institutions that supports this. Over.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
I would also like to respond, if that's okay, Sayana. Sayana, you're on mute, but I'll maybe go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, to further supplement the point made by Ms. Pinto, when engineers from India, from especially Tata Consulting organizations go out to work, there's definitely an orientation around the culture piece which is done so that they understand how you need to communicate, what works. And of course, coming to the compliance bit, the law of the land always takes precedence. So wherever they're going to work, they have to be compliant with that. But in terms of the question around culture, there's a lot of work which is done and orientation is given to the engineers.
Yes, I think that's a very important part of it, especially companies who are interested in overseas business. They have to be very aware of this requirement as far as their, manpower resources are concerned. Mr. Stump, there is a question for you. I admire the pyramid explanation of the ethical decision making. Is it possible to convince an habitual wrongdoer down the pyramid without punitive actions in general?
This is a really interesting challenge to address, because the notion of what happens as an individual moves down that pyramid of choice is that he or she begins to reinforce the decisions that he or she has made. And there's a concept called cognitive dissonance that occurs. And the idea is that it's very difficult for a person to believe one thing and act differently. So according to the notion of the pyramid of choice, if you act unethically, the person will start to believe that the unethical behavior is correct, because if they believe their behavior is incorrect, but they act unethically, it creates a very difficult situation for that individual to reconcile. So how do you work with someone who is a habitual offender? That's very, very difficult, because they have convinced themselves that what they're doing is correct. Hence my challenge that we need to assist younger members of the profession, younger consultants, before they get to the point of an ethical decision and they make the wrong choice. Can you rehabilitate someone that is far down the pyramid? That's a very, very challenging topic to address. It may depend on the individual, but again, everyone has the ability to manage their own approach to things, their own approach to their ethics. So if you start with yourself, and then as my colleague Alok had mentioned, the tone from the top within an organization, the leadership drives a lot of the way that the company acts. So there's individual responsibility and there's leadership responsibility. And in working with those two positions, you can try to prevent people from sliding too far down the pyramid to a point where it's not possible to rehabilitate their thinking just because it's part of who they are at that point. So thank you for the opportunity to respond.
Thank you. Alok, would you like to respond to that also, your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Sayana. I think, see, these ethical dilemmas that we have, I find that, many people in our country, they do it also, it's not always for the greed or for the power, for the success, but sometimes it is so casually done. I will just give you one example, if you permit me. This happened with me in person. I was taking an interview for International Professional Engineers of Institution of Engineers India, wherein, there is a very tough exam through which the person comes in, and the final approval is through the interview. In the interview, I found that the person who passed a very difficult exam, he put my reference, he forged my signature, and he put as a reference my name. If it is just a matter of coincidence that I am the interviewer, and that gentleman was rejected. But the point which I am trying to make is that, this was, there was no reason for him to go unethical and do this. It was so simple to get a reference from a fellow Institution of Engineers fellows. There are hundreds of fellows all around, and a little bit of effort, this could have been done. So I think the culture, the value system is important, and a bit of sensibility needs to be there. And that somehow, I think, as an association, we need to, all the associations, I'm not talking about CEI alone, but Institution of Engineers and all these professional associations, we need to touch upon these sensibilities carefully.
Thank you very much, Alok. Colonel Burby, would you like to add to how a system can promote ethical behavior amongst its stakeholders? It's not only the young engineers, it's all stakeholders who are involved. How can the system promote ethical behavior? Any ideas on that based on your vast experience?
Thank you, Sayana. It's a great question because it touches upon the spirit of the code and connects with the aspect of inner governance, which I talked about a little earlier. But I would be remiss if I do not bring into the purview 3 points which came in from the panelists. Kalpana spoke about principles that drive a code of conduct or a code of ethics. Richard spoke about the pyramid of choice and how the pyramid of choice, when a person like you or I or any one of us is at a point of decision, where does the needle move? Either to cheat, manipulate, or not to cheat and manipulate. And it's within us that the decision matrix, based on our own belief systems, based on our own experience, and based on certain pressures in the mind on what to do and what not to do, short-term versus long-term. And third, Anna spoke about how the World Bank is trying to improve the communication so that people speak up when they see something. The elephant in the room question is, how do you get people, how do you promote them to speak up? And how do you get people to speak up when they know what's happening and they can see or they can hear or they can feel or they can smell something going wrong? I do believe we need to address the what's in it for me question for the person who's thinking of raising the concern or reporting a flag, a red flag. So how does one possibly encourage raising concerns and reporting cases? I think first and foremost, we need to recognize that that person who is reporting or raising a concern is being loyal to the brand over every other priority. And how do we nurture and encourage that spirit of loyalty to the brand? The one thing we don't do is don't shoot the messenger. And the second is remove all the fear or the trepidation or the apprehension about reporting. Easier said than done. Be fair and reasonable. Maintain confidentiality. Uphold the consent of the whistleblower, because the whistleblower need not and may not want her or his identity to be known even when you have to publicize the case. Protect the whistleblower from harm, either psychological, physical, mental, or all three put together. Provide viable and credible channels of communication that are confidential and safe to report. And the acid test at the end of this, how many whistleblowers remain in a system after they've blown the whistle? That would be the key measure of the effectiveness of the policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Burby. There are two more questions. We are trying to wind up because we are over time. Fighting corruption and corrupt practices is a multidimensional issue concerning all stakeholders. What if the corruption is emanating from the executing agency? What is the policy of the financing agency? I presume that this would be to Anna.
Yes, thank you. Really quickly. Basically, if we hear about an issue and then we go about investigating it, just picking up on what the Colonel talked about, we very much take care of people who report. We're very careful about the information, and we're also very careful about the results. So if the investigation results in certain findings that implicate local officials, since we do not investigate local officials, what we do is we have an interlocutor in terms of the Ministry of Finance, for example, in the case of India. So these reports are without, by the way, without the informant being mentioned. These reports are the results of the investigations are shared with the credible authorities and through the Ministry of Finance. And we recognize that the local systems have jurisdiction over local officials. So that is the situation right now. As a financier, we observe our own legal mandates, but we also recognize that the local laws are the ones that prevail over local officials. So if there are those requests for information, we may provide this, but again, protecting the sanctity of information that is confidentially shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no more questions, except one which we will answer separately. If it is okay with all the panelists, would you like to make one last remark before we wind up?
May I start, Sayona?
Sure.
I would like to close.
Please make it brief because we are awfully out of time.
Yeah, I would just like to mention that, oftentimes the maintaining high ethical standard comes at a cost. And a very recent example I would give that one of the NHI, one of the engineer from a consulting was murdered on a road project because he was trying to maintain a high ethical standard. And but so be it if it comes at a cost. Many a times a consultant wants to have a high ethical standard but may not prosper in the business, so to say, commercially. But I think it's still the message needs to go that despite this, if you maintain a high ethical standard in the long run, it will be good for the country and for the individual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Stump, you'd like to go? I mean, go next?
Certainly. This is a very important conversation about ethics and about integrity. The challenge is it has to continue. It shouldn't be just a point in time. We have to continue to reinforce the themes that are being talked about, continue the conversation, and make sure that we're acting collectively and not just individually. Thank you.
Thank you. Colonel Burby.
Thank you, Sayona. I'd endorse what Richard said. Let this not be a point in time. From the invitation to the entire participant fraternity, please send in your questions, and through Sayona would reach out to any one of us who she deems appropriate to respond. And we are in this game together, and we better like that we need to be together and not dislike it. So we are committed, and I would like to stay committed to helping CEAI in its mission and its vision going forward in the space of what we've done today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dasgupta.
I just like to tell you, I mean, this is to all concerned, that it is not really can be limited to the ethical conduct in engineering consultancy practice, because it is not, consultant cannot have the ethical conduct in isolation actually as a kind of a island. Just to ethical conduct is the character of the people actually. So all the stakeholders need to do the ethical practice. Then only it is possible. Otherwise, it's not possible. Probably CA can take a lead to call all the stakeholders like contractors, the client, and the consultants, and they can work together and find out. It is a kind of character. It is not really the practice of consulting engineers only. So that has to be taken care of. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta. That's very important for everybody to note. It is not just a responsibility of the consultants, it is a responsibility of each and every stakeholder. So thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists, Mr. Richard Stump, Ms. Anna Pinto-Eber, Mr. Bomik, Lieutenant Colonel Alan Burby, Dr. Dasgupta, and Ms. Kalpana Jay Shankar. Thank you all very much for joining us in this discussion. It has been a very interesting discussion. And I would now like to invite Mr. Umesh Srivastav, who's the chair of the Ethics Subcommittee. Mr. Srivastav is executive chairman and founder of Holtec Consulting. The company has been active in the cement industry since 1967 in over 70 countries. Mr. Srivastav has been president of CEAI and Harvard Club of India. He has served on the governing councils of several professional bodies. In recognition of his service to the consulting fraternity, he has received the Lifetime Achievement Award from CEAI, the IIT BHU Alumni Association, and the Indian Cement Review. Mr. Srivastav got his engineering degree from Banaras Hindu University, advanced management from Harvard Business School. Mr. Srivastav, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, get me connected.
Yeah, we can see you, Mr. Srivastav.
All right, that's it. Good. Thank you, Sayana. Our most valuable speakers and panel members, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, our appreciation for the two speakers from USA, Mr. Richard Stump and Ms. Anna Abbott. Getting up so early in the morning to participate in the webinar and to grace the occasion shows their deep interest in the subject as well as in consultancy promotion in India. According to a saying in India, lamp is lit first at home and then only at workplace, and then only at a place of worship. This is true for ethics as well. If at home we are not following ethics, how can we promote ethics elsewhere? So the ethics or anything like ethics has to start from home itself. And the person to start is nobody else but you or we. Ethics originates from the Greek word ethos, which means character. A well-known adage says, wealth is lost, nothing is lost. If health is lost, something is lost. If character is lost, everything is lost. You may please observe here the linkage between the character and ethics, which go always together. There can't be ethics without character, or there can't be character without ethics. Loss in ethics means loss in character. Practice of ethics in engineering consultancy is important in everyday situation, and an ethical approach can and does lead to positive results. We are happy to record our heartfelt thanks to the keynote speaker, Mr. Stump, for the clarity of his views in his erudite presentation, and Ms. Abbott for a thought-provoking special address. Brief but stimulating presentations by all the panel speakers generated a lot of lively discussion on ethics. Audience too did not fall behind, and they came out in big numbers to make their inquiries and made some laser sharp comments. Our deep sense of thanks and appreciation goes to all the participants, all the attendees who attended this event with great enthusiasm and participated in the discussions, which helped in crowning this event with success. Such events cannot happen overnight. Wheels start rolling around weeks and months ahead of the event. It requires planning. It requires bird's eye for details. Locating such a gallery of eminent and knowledgeable speakers itself poses a challenging task. We are fortunate to be supported by a team of dedicated colleagues and an efficient and motivated secretariat in CEI. Profuse thanks to the entire team. Once again, we express our gratefulness to you all. For those in USA, wish you a very pleasant morning. For those in India, wish you a delightful evening. There is a poet in India who said just 2 lines, I'll say, and they are in Hindi. I'll translate that in English as well. This is true for consultants as well, like anybody else. कुछ इस तरह से निभा अपना किरदार, कुछ इस तरह से निभा अपना किरदार कि पर्दा गिर जाए पर तालियां बजती रहें. कुछ इस तरह से निभा अपना किरदार कि पर्दा गिर जाए पर तालियां बजती रहें. It means something like this. As consultants, we are expected to play our roles so well that echo of clapping continues long after the drop of the curtain. The curtain for the current webinar is now also about to drop on a very enjoyable and a positive note. Goodbye, sayonara, wiedersehen, adios, and namaskar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srivastav. That's a fitting end to the entire webinar. Thank you all very much. We are very sorry about the glitches that happened. We actually had two of our hosts who went offline. So very sorry. they came back ultimately, but one of those things. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning to those in the US. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sayana. Namaste.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.